You're very welcome along, and it's only been a week since we had that popular polling station here on Star Sports about the new leader of the SNP, and what an unbelievable shake-up in the space of a week we've already had in the market. So it's been whittled down to three, maybe two, maybe one. So we're going to talk about that today, and also they loved a 5-year plan in some of the old shall we say, totalitarian regimes. Keir Starmer has something of a 5-point plan for the future of Britain at a time of great, great peril, really, for the United Kingdom in general, such that our boy Keir Starmer called over, or our boy rather Rishi Sunak called over to Northern Ireland in recent days to try and get the protocol over the line. And a lot of stuff happening, but we have to start with Scotland. And let's welcome our two guests to the show today, William Kedjanyi and Paul Krishnamurty. How are we, lads?
Very well, Johnny. How are you?
I'm good, William. I had to trace my memory to the market last week, where I think Humza Yousaf was something like 7 or 8 to 1 when we recorded this last week. He was third or fourth in. He's now 2 to 5. We've Kate Forbes seemingly having self-torpedoed in terms of her own race because of her comments about gay marriage and so on and so forth. And then we have second in Ash Regan, 25's bar. What has happened here? And is this 2 to 5 over the line?
So what's happened? A huge amount. Namely, firstly, Angus Robertson not entering the race. He was our favourite, and I think it was generally seen as the main leading contender. He didn't run. Humza Yousaf and Ash Regan did. I think Robertson not running probably created that lane for Yousaf to pick up endorsements, especially from those who are sort of real believers or basically real Sturgeonites. Kate Forbes entered. It became very quickly in the betting market by a 2-horse race. And then when Forbes was asked about her beliefs, especially on gay marriage, and that she wouldn't have voted for gay marriage in 2014, which caused huge controversy. And then also she said that, according to her beliefs, she thinks it's best to have children inside of marriage, and she wouldn't really, basically contemplate doing otherwise. And that's led to a bit of a firestorm. She's lost support from MSPs. We don't yet have public polling on the reaction to those, although I imagine, well, I don't imagine, I know she's out of lockstep with most of the UK on this. And as such, she's now become a huge drifter. She's 5 to 1, having been, as short as evens at a time when it was seen as a 2-horse race. So, yeah, an awful lot within a week.
What does it tell you, Paul, in fairness? I mean, when we had the gay marriage referendum in the Republic of Ireland, according to my Twitter sort of timeline, it was going to be an absolute landslide, when clearly it wasn't. It was only I was getting one version of, what people were thinking, what would have been on social media. She's expressed a personally held opinion. She was honest, and now she's screwed.
I assume that she's screwed. I think that is the case. And the bigger point I would make is that it may well be possible to win a party leadership contest, right, with a particular view like that. I don't know. I really don't want to express an uninformed opinion about SNP members, but I'm certain that holding those opinions in a general election or in a nationwide election is catastrophic, right? And I think that one of the things that's really become clear this week, and indeed over months, because it also applies with Brexit, is this is the problem with nationalism. When nationalism takes over your politics, it supersedes everything else, and it forgets that out of that massive coalition of Brexit voters or Scottish nationalist voters, there's a whole range of other opinions. It doesn't mean they agree about social issues. It doesn't mean they agree about economics. And I think certainly down here, and from a sort of national perspective, when we talk about the SNP, we focus everything on independence because that is what they're about. And that's all we've really thought about for the last 6-7 years. Now it's become clear that actually they're just as divided as the rest of society on all of these matters. And I think it will new to them. And of course, that is massively to Labour's advantage, because little brief going in history, go back to 2014 before the referendum. Ed Miliband is riding high in the polls. There's a very good chance for a Labour majority. I think it was about even money, a Labour majority. And then nationalism comes to the fore. UKIP in England, SNP in Scotland. And within months, Labour are facing an existential crisis, because that's not Labour's thing. Labour can't do nationalism. They're not really into that. It doesn't convince. They'll always lose that argument. But I just wonder, with this happening, with the way that Brexit's going, this is the end of that era. There are other things going on. Independence and Brexit and national identity are not the single most important things going on in Britain right now to voters. And thus those coalitions are going to fall apart. And this really does favour Labour.
Well, yeah, well, on that point, I find it hilarious in Northern Ireland that we've so much, brouhaha about those issues and nothing about climate change, which is obviously, I mean, I think there was no Green candidate actually elected in the last election. But anyway, and nationalism, I think, is so narrow as to make your point completely valid. And in terms of Angus Robertson, William, is this an implication, veil or otherwise, that it's a bit of a poison chalice replacing Sturgeon in the first place?
Yeah, I could definitely take a bit of that. It was it's basically following in the footsteps of Ferguson. That's sort of the way to look at it.
I was going to make that analogy, and then the fact that he's Scottish made me think that's great, and then I completely forgot. Man United play Barca tonight. There we go.
Indeed, topical and timely. No, it's a very difficult job. You had a lot to deal with internally in Scotland that wasn't getting to do with independence. Independence also wasn't just a calling card. Listen, I think Sturgeon, by and large, did a very good job under very difficult circumstances. That's the appearance it came to me. But domestically, there were some shortcomings and there were some real issues: education, healthcare. Also, I think in general, at points like economic attainment, etc. And a new first minister.
You had that gender issue malarkey as well.
Indeed, yeah, which was really putting individual pressure on politicians in terms of their stance on it. It's a very difficult job to take, and Robertson, he does have a young family. It's maybe in hindsight sort of the biggest surprise that he didn't want that, because the next SNP leader's got a hell of a job to do domestically, and then also you've got the fading power of independence. It still, I think, ties together a large pool of Scottish voters, but it's not the sort of automatic win that it used to be. So yeah, a difficult job. No surprise, I think, that some consider themselves maybe too young, didn't want to take over from Sturgeon. They're looking forward to the future. And I think as far as Yousaf being over the line, he should be, but they used to say a week is a long time in politics. A day is now a long time in politics. We've got a month for this to go, and it's one member, one vote. That doesn't scream buying money to me.
Is it not a great time for somebody to take this position, Paul, in the sense that you could be the one that goes down in history as the guy or woman that brought, Scottish independence over the line? I'm not sure when the vote is going to happen. Obviously, there's a lot of reluctance in London. Is it not a good time to replace Nicola Sturgeon?
It's a terrible time, because that's not going to happen soon. London aren't going to allow that. We are talking at least 3, 4, maybe 7 years away. And in terms of the poison chalice, I mean, they are certain to go backward under this leader. They're in such a strong position electorally in both parliaments. They have to go backwards. And plus, of course, as I say, that now we're in a situation where the SNP are going to get judged on, may well get judged on far wider positions than they ever have been in the past, right? My feeling is, I mean, I haven't bet heavily on this. I should have laid Robertson because I was very sceptical, as I said last week, that was a real favourite. I've backed Humza Yousaf at 2.1 on Betfair, and I've got a bit on Ash Regan at 5.4, not a big bet. I'm pretty confident it will come from one of those two. It will boil down to that, and there'll be a cash out. But I think that the bigger takeaway is they're going to collapse. They're not going to collapse, but Labour are going to make massive headway in Scotland next time round.
Yeah, you pretty much said that last week. And do you agree with that, William? The SNP can only go down from its position of strength under Sturgeon, and there are so many issues facing the UK as a whole at the moment that maybe this whole national independence debate takes a little bit of a step aside, because there are so many issues day to day for Scottish people that they have to deal with.
Yes, I agree on both. What Sturgeon accomplished as leader in a political sense was extraordinary. Basically everything bar independence. And in terms of party leadership, I know she wasn't the Westminster leader, but she was absolutely the most powerful party leader in the UK, and it wasn't even close. You know, how many prime ministers has she seen off? I think it's worth remembering. Yeah, they'll go back because I think that's just natural. They'll probably struggle a little bit with the rejigging of their identity. They'll be more focused on their domestic record, particularly. Some very hard problems which they'll have to find solutions to. And in terms of independence, the problem, well, I don't want to call it necessarily a problem. The debate's not going to go away. There's a base level of interest now, which is committed at least to seeing it through to another referendum. But it won't be, I think, the only issue. I think there'll be more focus on domestic issues. I think there'll be more focus on the state of the country generally, and more focus on what the Scottish government is doing and how it's doing. And all of that will make life more difficult for the next First Minister, whoever they happen to be.
Paul, I've spoken to Paul, I've actually I've spoken to fewer people as negative about the state of the UK at the moment as your good self. If you were Scottish, how would you vote?
Labour. I'd vote Labour anyway, and I say that without any great enthusiasm. But
how would you vote in an independence election, in an independence referendum?
Remain.
Why?
Not because I don't understand, because I think that first of all, the process of independence would be chaotic, divisive, etc. It will not be nice, any more nice than Brexit. It would be worse than Brexit. Secondly, I'm not sure that the questions have been answered. What exactly is the SNP's defence policy? We live in an incredibly dangerous world right now. You know, I think that all of that with the nuclear weapons is going to be a huge issue. I also think that in the long run, Britain will form a much better relationship with the European Union and reverse a lot of the problems that it has right now. And that is the national interest for Scotland, is to be in have a strong role in a united kingdom. And I think they can get that actually out of a Labour government. I think that that's precisely what Labour probably would give them. Just on the betting though, right? One thing I would take a big odds about is Nicola Sturgeon being next SNP leader but one. Right, there is a very good chance here that she's going to take a couple of years out. They're going to struggle. She will remain the senior figure in the independence movement, and she could come back. Alex Salmond did it. And I think they will very quickly realise how important she was to them.
You know, I think William Paul he explains it well there. How, you know, you can emphasize the fear of change to sway an electorate, absolutely. But Brexit happened, which was a 9-2 shot on the day, for all of that. And now we have these stories coming in Ireland anyway about a shortage of cucumbers and a shortage of tomatoes and all this. And I'm reading this is partly because it's cold in Morocco and Spain, but it's mainly because of Brexit. I don't even know the truth anymore. But the situation in Ireland in terms of media is there seems to be a lot of almost wallowing in the state of affairs in Britain, which I think is alarming considering you know, we're a bit of a tax haven state. What is the general feeling in London at the moment in terms of where this is going under Rishi Sunak?
So in terms of EU relations, things are improving. I think they had to, because with Boris Johnson, it was just used as a political pawn, and there was frankly just blatant and outright disrespect and anger. You know, they became enemies. That people might say different, but they became adverse rival states. Sunak has been very different in that approach. He's trying to be much more pragmatic with it, and you can see that in his efforts to get the protocol working over the line. The issue, however, is that for all that he's got a technical majority, he has the May problem. If it isn't the DUP, it's his own backbenchers. And if it's not his own backbenchers, it's the DUP. So nothing sensible can be done. And also just going back a bit, Paul making the point there about a better relationship as a whole with the EU. I'm inclined to agree, because you're seeing that now, right? You're seeing that now. Cleverly, and Chris Heaton-Harris are having like weekly calls with Sefcovic. They're meeting in person. Sunak's been there, and he's now negotiating, trying to get this over the line with communities in Northern Ireland. There's a push. There is a seriousness there. It's not often I can say that about this government. There's a genuine seriousness there. Now, I imagine under a Labour government, particularly if it had a majority, there would be the ability to change parts of that relationship. And I think the EU would be very receptive to that, to decrease friction. Sorry to get very, very technical. I think the mood in London is we'd love to do something, but it's not up to them. It's not up to them. He's got the May issue. It's 2019 all over again.
So, well, let's get on to Keir Starmer then. So this five, what do we call it? 5 missions. And I do note that he wants to Britain to get its future back again, which is a clear play on you know what. How is this going to go down, William? How has it gone down? Starmer obviously in a position of extreme strength at the moment, an unenviable sense of strength for a Labour leader because the Conservatives have been such a shit show. How can he screw this up?
Nigh on impossible, basically, bar a scandal of absolutely biblical proportions, and it doesn't appear that there's one yet. I think one would probably have been found by now. He's had his top team there long enough. I don't think there's a skeleton in the closet that can bring this sort of lead down. In terms of his 5 missions and how it's gone down, I think the response has been relatively lukewarm to it. I think this is very much about creating an image of Labour as a government in way so that people associate the party with power. Labour have lead of about 23 points in Westminster polling. They've got roughly the same lead on the economy, really important. They're still well on course. What we're trying to find out now, what he's trying to give us, I think, is the idea of what a Labour government would do. I don't think this really told us much, just because there wasn't huge amounts of detail there. And I think what he and the Labour Party want is for people to associate the Labour Party with being best on these issues and with caring on them. That will probably just about do the job. One thing I would say he's missing the boat on massively here is house building. Every person in this country, nearly every person in this country has some sort of issue with housing, whether it's high rents, whether it's massive asking prices, deposits, mortgages, the quality of housing. It's a massive open goal. And to his credit, Michael Gove is actually doing a lot of work on that. There's still a huge opportunity for Labour to go and take that mantle. And I think that would go a long way to really locking this down.
Okay, I can't speak in the retrospect on that, but if it were, if you're talking about the Irish housing crisis, and in first world terms, this is a housing crisis. It's absolutely a housing crisis in the sense that Sinn Féin's electoral success is hugely based on that. They will go into government and figure out that it's an absolute nightmare to get anything done in terms of housing, and maybe that's why Labour are being a little bit nuanced in this. And maybe, Paul, this is why Starmer's talking about the next decade. He's talking about the long term. He's not saying anything dramatic. He knows that as long as they're not the Conservatives, they'll get voted in. And he's playing the game of coming across maybe as quite sensible without making massive promises at the same time.
Yes, that's exactly what he's doing. And also, this is just an essential noise filler. He has to say something. So we will just rustle up this completely.
A bit like the polling station.
Our conversations are far more substantial than any of this. I mean, can you imagine one of us actually putting money down, putting a concrete Britain being the fastest growing G7 economy in 5 years? It's just crazy. It's just just a vague aspiration that will create some very slightly positive noise for about 10 seconds. I mean, this is what I have a go at the government for doing all the time. So I've got to have a go at Labour. We live in a world of complete and utter spin. There is political theatre, fake talking points, vague aspirations. And that's all that he's done today. I think that come later this year or whatever moment that he's got waiting for it, there will be something on housing. There will be some concrete offers on housing, on childcare, on the health service, on education, right? Very much like Blair's infamous pledge card when they got in. And they won't be massively optimistic, bold policies. They will be concrete things that you can measure over the next 2 or 3 years, and then do the vague talk about the long term as well. And somehow then you get, you can say, I have a vision.
What rating would you give Sunak out of 10 so far?
What, on a personal level or on an electoral level?
Well, actually on a personal level, I know you're coming from a perspective of thinking the Conservatives are an absolute joke, but what would you give him out of 10?
I think that he is an infinitely more serious person than Boris Johnson. And I think that there are some efforts definitely underway to sort of manage things a bit better. I think he's politically inept most of the time, and ultimately he's got no material, has he? I mean, he's got to defend 13 years. These aren't telling people you're going to sort immigration out when you've been in for 13 years. It's ridiculous, and it's not working. So I'd say I'd give him 4, whereas I'd have given Boris Johnson 1.
You would have given Boris 1. I wouldn't go that far. What about you, William?
Yeah, 4.5 is about where I'm at.
I'd go higher. I think the challenges are so great. I think he's managed to keep things relatively low key. He's not done a bad job in Northern Ireland so far. I'd give him a 6.
This is where my 4s come from. The recognition and the sort of push forward on certain issues, I think has been good to see. I can't believe I'm saying that, but we've had somebody who's trying to push forward on serious issues. But
he's on a vaguely ruthless side when it was needed.
Yeah, I mean, where he loses points with me is I wouldn't say political ineptitude. I would say poor, unacceptable choices of people in government. I think we still very much got that standards problem, where people who just shouldn't be in public life, or who should be at least sort of suspended or whatever, are just staying because he's either not concerned enough or he feels he's too weak to do so. And I think also in general there are a lot of policy directions that are misguided. Immigration is actually sort of a good example of this. I'm not saying it's not important, but you're going to have a big stop the boats campaign when surely Sunak must be aware and must be told. And to be fair, he's seen this bit. Why aren't you working more with France and Albania? Why aren't you making more safe routes or whatever? Why aren't you trying something different than what's been done for 13 years? We've had 13 years of a crackdown mentality, and all it's gotten us to is here. So yeah, probably about that. If I can bring it back to some market talk just for an update, we're now bottled on Labour to win a majority. This follows some poll changes in Scotland, some estimates which would be very, very advantageous for Keir Starmer if he can win 10, 20 seats. However many seats he wins in Scotland, he doesn't need to, as Paul correctly remarked last week, win in England, which would require sort of these huge swings, which at the moment you're getting, but there is a long time, unfortunately for some or many, until the next election. So we don't know exactly what the field will be like, but markets hardened. We're now basically 60%. They get a majority. It's about sort of where the votes fall if you're going to do it tomorrow. But no, a long way to go with everything in the UK at the moment, and lots more news to come.
Yeah, that 9-4 is interesting. As Paul has spoken very well about this, Dave, an awful lot of ground to make up in certain constituencies. Scotland probably has changes in the sense of an expected Labour bounce. But I got to call you on one thing you said there. You shouldn't be in public service or something like that, or shouldn't be in essentially a politician. The thing is, Paul, who in their right bloody mind would be a politician nowadays? You're going to have all these trolls, this hate stuff on social media. The public are going to come across as generally people you grow to hate. Who in their right mind would be a politician nowadays, Paul?
I'm completely with you. And you'd have to be, you'd either have to be utterly committed to the cause, or what I suspect you have now, which is just grifters and careerists. I mean, I read an interest. So just going back to the Tory decline as well, because it's very relevant. There's a lot of problem in a lot of constituencies getting candidates. And I was reading some interviews with them, with chairmen of associations, and they said one of the problems was a lot of people were joining just because they thought this was an easy path. Become a Tory councillor in this time where we'll win elections, get on a committee, set up some relationship with a company or some contract thing, And now because they're losing, no one wants to know. That pool of just completely self-interested people have moved out. And I can't help but think that is how the game is now, because it's saying I wouldn't do it. You know, you're going to, never mind all the grief, like you say, from the public. Imagine the stress on your personal life.
Oh, absolutely. And imagine, and then if you family, imagine the stress on them having to see what's said about you on social media. Just briefly, Paul, we're coming up to the year-long anniversary of the invasion of Russia now. What's your take on it at the moment? Where is this going to end?
I still think that Russia are losing. I think that it's catastrophic what's going on. And I think that at the end of this will be the collapse of the Russian Federation. It will just break up into various more anarchic smaller versions of what it is already, you know, of mafia states, of, you know, ethnic conflict. And I think that there's probably a power battle underway between Yevgeny Prigozhin and others for the mantle, and it could get very, very nasty. But I think regarding the war, everything I'm hearing is their losses are catastrophic. They have no, their equipment is terrible. There's no sign of the Western support letting up for Ukraine. And ultimately, all they can do at the moment is, all they're ultimately going to be able to do is continually bombard them with missiles. So I don't think it's sustainable, but we are dealing with a regime that has no regard for human life. So it could go on.
Last word to you, William.
Yeah, I think Paul summed up a lot pretty well. Basically, we're in attrition, and it's basically about the individual battles, Western training and equipment versus Russian numbers, conditions, sort of the advantages of being embedded wherever you are, and say you're using Crimea as a base and all of that sort of thing. Unfortunately, I don't see any quick end to it, which is very, very sad on that. Politically, Biden in the last week, as we know, he went to Kyiv via Poland. He went and gave a speech in Poland. He's been on a tour of the Baltics, etc. I think one of the interesting things to take in the last year has been how Biden, considering the effects of the war, support for Ukraine, both from governments and also from voters, has not led up in the way some feared it would. It has not been the death knell for administrations who have given the most support. You know, the US has given hundreds of billions of dollars. Biden's approvals are about as strong as they've ever been. This despite economic pressures, which the whole world has felt from it. And I just think it's very interesting how, you know, middle of last winter, people sort of openly doubting whether you'd get, say, 6 months or whatever of people tolerating this, and actually it's pretty unchanged. The leaders who are doing it are remaining about as unpopular or popular as they were a year ago. So there is definitely an international solidarity behind Ukraine. Just to end this, by the way, because we had another big visit. Donald Trump went to East Palestine in Ohio, the site of a huge natural disaster. There have been several huge natural disasters in the US over the last week. And he and Ron DeSantis are still pretty close in that battle for, well, we say the battle, DeSantis hasn't yet declared, the race basically to be the next GOP nominee. You can get 6-5 Trump, 7-4 DeSantis. Biden is now 4-9 to be the Democratic nominee. He's 5-2 to be elected president. Always a long way to go here, but I just sort of, the more I think about it, the more I think Biden's still sort of underpriced in both markets. I don't think the market's properly adjusted to the fact that he's running. And I think his focus on the job has people thinking that he's trying to delay it, when actually he's focusing on things in hand. And I think he'll just run at a time of his own choosing. Maybe the summer, maybe April or something.
Yeah, we're going to end with maybes, but we got through a lot today with the SNP, what's going on in Labour. And yeah, as Will alluded to there, we will talk more about the States next week and what's going to be an amazing election next year. We shall be back with the polling station next week.